All right, everyone, we have another fun TLN webinar today. And today we are back with Ellen Abbey-Johnson, and we're going to be talking about dealing with the angry public. And we're going to have Ellen start off.
Great. Thank you, DJ. Thanks for having me. Thank you, everyone, for joining today. It's great to be back with this group. I provided a different virtual training, I think last summer, if I remember correctly, DJ. You can fact check me on that. But it's great to be back and share with you all today. First, I want to start with a little apology. I am getting over sickness from last week that has lingered. And us Michigan people this time of year play the game of sickness versus allergies. So it has lingered a little bit. I'm going to do my best to keep my voice going throughout today. But if I take a few more water breaks, please excuse me. It should hold out. Like DJ said, my name's Ellen. I'm a licensed master social worker. I am with your EAP, AllOne Health. You might be used to the name Encompass as well. So at the start of the year, we just did a little name change. Encompass has been a part of AllOne Health for, gosh, 5 years, 6 years at this point. And so I've just been going over this briefly with all presentations I've been providing just to clear up any confusion. Encompass, AllOne Health, all the same. We just are going under one name now to hopefully lessen confusion. But your same team of clinicians and support providing services to you all. So you'll start to see that AllOne Health name more. Same contact information as well. But just want to highlight that so there's no confusion. How I like to operate through trainings is I like it best if it feels like a conversation. My hope is that you leave today feeling like you've pulled something out that feels applicable to you and your unique workspace. And really, the best way to do that is through engagement. So I'll be throwing out some questions here and there throughout the presentation. If there's questions, feel free to throw them in the chat. I will do my best to monitor that as we go. So please don't feel like you have to hold all of those to the end. If you're anything like me, if you don't throw it out while you have it, you might forget it. So feel free to use the chat. I'll do my best to monitor or unmute at any point to give a response or ask a question. That's really my preferred way of operating. So please don't hesitate to do so. So for today, we are going to be talking through some communication skills and some kind of tips and tricks of how might we work with an individual or a member of the public who may come in upset. Maybe they have some ideas of the services they should be getting, whether those are realistic or not, might be another discussion. But somebody who may come in upset, asking for something specific, or maybe they become angry and start to escalate while they are in your presence. We're going to talk through some communication pieces, including our nonverbal communication, then as well as review some tips of how do you tend to yourself after an encounter like that. It's common that that brings up its own kind of feelings and reactions within yourselves. You're all human with your own experiences that you're bringing into those situations. So it's natural for that to elicit different types of responses and reactions in each person. So how do we tend to ourselves as individuals after the fact? One thing I want to mention as well, I'm sorry, if I'm looking to the left, that's where I see you guys. And I appreciate some of you have your cameras on, which I always greatly appreciate if you're comfortable. Love cameras, makes me feel like I'm really presenting to real people. So if I keep looking to the left, it's because I'm trying to look at you all. Not looking off into nowhere. So thank you for those of you that have your cameras on. I appreciate it. All right. So first, we're going to kind of touch base on when you're considering a behavior. So I'm sure when we think about an upset public or a member of the public who comes in upset, there may be different sets of circumstances that come to each of your minds based on your experience. You might have a frequent flyer even that comes to mind. So really, considering the behavior is a part of that. right? Because you all know your unique work environments. If you have some of the frequent flyers, maybe what are some of the warning signs you know to look for when somebody's getting upset? And this is a way to kind of check in with ourselves of what kind of difficulty might we be working with? Is this situational difficulty? Now, this type of difficulty we have all found ourselves in at some point or another. Maybe we're on the phone with the internet company, or the electric company, or we're at an airport and our flight continues to be delayed, right? We might escalate in a way that's not typical of our baseline. We might find ourselves saying, I apologize. I know I'm getting frustrated. I'm not frustrated at you. I'm frustrated at the circumstance, right? This is a situation where, for whatever the set of circumstance is, we find ourselves escalating, but we're aware of the behavior. We're still trying to keep it in check, or maybe we didn't keep it in check and we're coming back and apologizing. Hey, I know that wasn't correct. My fault. Let's start over. I know I'm frustrated. It's not at you. So they may indicate their own level of uncomfortability with their actions. This is a one-off, typically. Then we have chronic difficulty. This is the pattern of behavior. This might start to be getting into that frequent flyer of, okay, we know this individual often comes in, and when they come in, they might be combative or upset. Maybe they often have questions or concerns that they are raising. We kind of know to keep an eye out for this person in these interactions. Then we have abnormal difficulty. This is behavior that may be chemically induced or enhanced or an acute mental health crisis or concern. So we might start to see some behaviors that are not typical of our day-to-day interactions, or of this person. Maybe we've interacted with them before and these behaviors just don't quite align with what we're used to seeing. Excuse me. This may look like some slurred speech. This may look like disruptance in their cadence of walking. This may look like inappropriate language that's atypical for the individual. Something that kind of tips us off to something's not quite right. So I throw this out here at the beginning because based on what difficulty we have in front of us might require a different response from us or elicit a different response in us as an individual, right? If I have somebody in front of me, maybe displaying a situational difficulty, and they're saying, I know I'm upset. I'm not upset at you. I'm upset at the circumstance. My empathy may look different than if I have the chronic difficulty in front of me. And I might have to know that within myself and know, okay, what do I need to do to remain calm and professional given that for whatever reason, I'm having a hard time maybe not escalating also with this individual. So something to keep in mind there in those situations. And as we go throughout this presentation, each of those difficulties is going to warrant a little bit of a different response and elicit a different response within us. So that I liked discussion. So we're going to kick it off with a discussion here. Let's take a couple of minutes and kind of talk through what are some barriers to effectively kind of handling a difficult or an emotional customer? What makes those interactions challenging to you? Feel free, unmute, use the chat, whatever you're most comfortable with.
I think one thing for me is that people are different and like to be handled in different ways. And there's really no, like, if X situation is happening, then this is what you say and do, and it makes it better. So just kind of determining like what would best serve them in this situation, because that can look different for different people.
Absolutely. That's a great point, Megan. Yes, everybody requires a little bit of a different approach or has different needs or is coming in with their own worldview and perspective that might hinder some of the communication. And you have none of that background, right? So sometimes I would imagine you're left feeling like you're guessing until you really get to know that individual or try some different things and see what works. Absolutely. In the chat, it says if the patron is yelling, sure, yeah, voices are raised, that starts to feel threatening. Taking things personally. Jocelyn, when you say taking things personally, is that we have a difficult time taking things personally, or the patron maybe is taking things personally, or maybe both? I could see where both can come into play. Any other things come to mind of what makes it difficult to communicate when someone is upset? Yeah, Paige shared, establishing rapport with frequent flyers takes time and effort we sometimes don't have. Sure, absolutely. And sometimes when somebody is escalated, that in and of itself requires some time. And when you have many other responsibilities or patrons involved, or you're trying to protect the other patrons within your environment, sometimes we don't have the time. We sometimes feel that the emotions being expressed are due to ourselves rather than due to something else going on in their life. Sure, yeah, we take that on of this person's responding to me instead of the circumstance or maybe what they brought in with them that day. Physical size, they tend to be smaller than most patrons. Sure, that can feel intimidating or threatening when there's a size difference, especially if the person maybe postures and uses that size. Absolutely. These are all great responses. And we see there's kind of different things that each of you bring up based on your own experience, your own worldviews. Um, Absolutely. We might think of things like concern for ourselves or concern for others around us. Sure. Maybe sometimes we don't realize it until we're really into the conversation and where it's really escalating. Or sometimes individuals don't give you too much of a warning. There are individuals that it can feel kind of like a switch is flipped and we're 0 to 100 and we don't have much of that response time. There might be others where it happens so slowly, we don't even really realize it's happening. Absolutely. Well, great. Thank you for throwing those out there and unmuting and sharing. So we're going to kind of talk through in those interactions, what are some things that we can do? And as Megan highlighted, unfortunately, there's no handbook to this, right? That says if X happens, then you do Y, and it spits out a perfect result. Working with humans is a bit more messy than that. Right. So today we're going to be talking about what are some best practices that we can utilize while also recognizing you are not responsible for how another human chooses to respond, right? So what can we do that knows, okay, I can walk away from the interaction saying, I kept my cool, professional, and respectful manner. And what that person chose to do has no bearing on how I interacted. I remained professional and respectful, and I can feel good about that interaction. But again, that doesn't necessarily output the perfect interaction, but sometimes it may help. So ultimately, our goal when interacting with the public is we want to de-escalate behaviors. We want to maintain a positive customer relationship, and we want to maintain safety. Now, with these goals, I would say these are not in order of importance. Maintaining safety is first and foremost always. And when I talk about safety, I'm always talking about physical safety as well as psychological safety. Right. Somebody does not have to physically threaten or push our physical boundaries without a boundary being crossed. That's still absolutely present. So we want to be mindful of our emotional, mental safety as well. So with these goals in mind, that's really what these strategies tackle. So first and foremost, safety first. DJ and I met kind of in preparation for this training, and we were talking about just the importance of safety and each individual knowing that they are supported and have the backing of leadership that if and when you feel safety is threatened, to get others involved. And one thing I always try to encourage in trainings like this, know your unique work environment and job description. Know your policies that impact you on a day-to-day basis of how to respond when safety becomes a problem or in question. Know who to go to, who to loop in, have phone numbers easily accessible. Make it as easy for yourself as possible and kind of equip yourself with that knowledge prior to a safety or crisis concern so you feel confident in your ability to know what to do next, right? Because in those situations where our safety is threatened, our emotions are high. And when emotions are high, it can be really difficult to problem solve through some of those steps. So do a refresher if you feel like you need it on what are some of those policies, whether it's who to get involved, how to notify leadership, and how high up leadership do you notify, and what can be done for your own safety with and ongoing encounters with this member of the public. Do they continue to have access? Is that access limited? Are there plans that we can put into place knowing that this individual maybe has been unsafe before and we have to handle it differently next time? We want to kind of remove the why. Reasoning with somebody who is escalated most of the time isn't going to bear much resolve because we're trying to play on logic when our logic is a little out the window, right? And that's not to say that this person does not have logic. They certainly do. It means we've escalated, though, to a point where our brain is operating much more out of the emotional side of the brain than the logical problem-solving part of the brain. So we're trying to tap into that part of the brain that's a bit clouded at the moment. It tends to escalate in an opposite, go against what you're really trying to do. We want to check in with ourselves. What am I feeling? I know there have been times for myself when somebody has maybe started to become frustrated and escalated, where I've had to catch myself and say, ooh, I can feel I'm escalating with them. That's not going to be helpful for me or for that individual. I got to pull back. I got to distance myself. Sometimes that distance might look like asking for help. Sometimes that might say, hey, I hear you. I want to get you the help that you need. Just give me one moment, please. I'm going to go grab a colleague and see if they can also help us work through this. I know that's not always possible, but are there times where we can press that pause? It gives us time to step away and to take some deep breaths. Then it brings in some backup as well. I would say, especially if we have a safety concern, find where you can put in that pause to get some backup for yourself, for your safety as well as the patron's safety, right? We want to bring in that added support. But sometimes it can be really difficult to ask for support. Does anybody find it challenging to reach out and ask? Seeing a few head nods. What makes it difficult? Why is there that barrier sometimes?
It can be hard to disengage with the patron long enough to be able to go and find someone to be a backup.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. It's hard to get them to a stopping point, or we might fear if I try to stop them, it's going to make it worse. Yeah, absolutely. Anyone else? What makes it difficult?
I think for me, sometimes it can be a pride issue. Like I feel incompetent if I have to bring someone else in.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's so common. I know I feel that for myself at times. I have to prove my competence. And if I were to say, hey, I need a second, does that make this person question me more? Is my supervisor going to question me?
I saw Nicole dropped in the chat.
Yep.
Sometimes the library is busy and there's no one available to help.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, we just don't have the numbers.
And then also Trish said it's situational if other patrons are present, not wanting to leave or to get someone because maybe there's a
Sure.
crowd or something.
Yeah, absolutely. We want to continue to monitor the situation to make sure other members of the public are remaining safe. These are great things. And I think, when it comes to our own internal talk, right, that's kind of one thing we have to work through. And then some of these things are, how do we maybe need to talk as a team to set some things into place? And again, we can't account for all variables, but are there certain things that we can do where if there are other patrons present, can we grab one of them, maybe somebody that we know, maybe somebody who seems concerned, and say, hey, can you go find another staff member for me, please, and have them come to the front, right? We don't super want to involve other members of the public, but if there are times where, man, it would be more unsafe for me to leave, maybe it's appropriate to ask that individual to go get some support. And sometimes I would imagine people do that on their own. At least I would hope. I would hope members of the public wouldn't watch an individual struggle and just kind of watch. But are there things that we can set up there? Is there a code word or name that you have in place within your work environment that kind of, if we use this word or call this out, that alerts other staff members that, hey, we have a situation, it's drop everything, somebody, at least one person needs to go check in. I know at least in our office, we have a name. And if I were to either yell this name or call, a colleague and say, I have so-and-so in my office, that alerts everybody that we have an unsafe situation and we got to pull somebody else in. So even trying to come up with, are there discrete ways that we can do this? Can we, maybe send something with a watch or with a phone to kind of let somebody know something may be happening? But really, where can we bring in this team approach of, even for our own peace of mind, of I don't have to handle it all on my own. I think sometimes that pressure of it's fully yours to resolve can be very heavy. And so are there times where we can say, okay, but I don't. And maybe that's bringing somebody in the moment, or maybe that's having an opportunity to talk with somebody about the incident afterwards and somebody else who understands, right? To say, hey, I had this encounter with this patron and it's just not settling with me. Can I talk it through with you? Right? Somebody else who may be able to say, hey, I've had a similar situation. I think you did everything that you can. There's so much good that can come from tapping into other peers who understand the unique work that you all do and the work that you do with the public and being able to process through some of these encounters. So do kind of a check-in for yourself of who's my person that I feel comfortable going to, even if it's not a situation where I feel I have to, or it's not possible for them to come in during the situation, but who am I going to afterwards to make sure I'm not carrying this home with me or into my next work day or into the next work week? Kathy shared, we refer to that type of patron as a loose page. Great. Know your lingo and know how to communicate that across the board. I love it. So ideally, we don't have to get to a safety concern. And sometimes there's no way of avoiding that. Sometimes an individual doesn't even give us time to utilize these diffusing strategies. But when there is time, when maybe we start to notice the volume raising, when we maybe know that, okay, this individual sometimes takes a little more time or needs a little bit more from us. These are kind of 5 elements of how do we diffuse some of that frustration. First is we want to maintain communication that comes from a place of respect. Demonstrating respect is the primary means of diffusing hostility. It's pretty hard to remain hostile at somebody who's being polite. It's kind of that age-old saying of kill them with kindness. We fully know sometimes that does not work. However, it's still important. It's also something that allows you to leave the situation saying, I did what I could, or I know I conducted myself in a way that I can be proud. right? Sometimes this is not just about what can we do for this patron, it's about what can we do for ourselves. So when the situation concludes, we feel good about the work that we did. So communicating with respect, that's appropriate active listening, our body language, trying not to judge the behavior, but how can I bring in a sense of understanding? And that kind of naturally leads us to the cooperate, right? How instead of finding points of disagreement, can I find points of agreement? Can I say, hey, I really want to help you resolve this. What can I do, right? Try to show some of that cooperation and get them to then work with you as well, right? Sometimes we have to make it their idea though. We can't just say, this is what we're going to do, right? Sometimes it takes a little more, I call it massaging, right? We kind of got to work this scenario a little bit more to bring that person around, to lessen some of that tension. We really can't cooperate though and collaborate with somebody without listening. Right? We got to listen to the need. Even if it's something that maybe we can't provide or it doesn't make a whole lot of logical sense to us, there's a reason for the behavior. So we're trying to listen for what is their goal? What are they trying to reach? Can I give some understanding to, okay, that this is what you're listening, this is what you're looking for, to kind of demonstrate, I hear you, I'm listening. There will be times though where we have to make assertions. We have to draw boundaries. We have to remain assertive, right? Diffusing anger, communicating with respect, and listening in cooperation does not mean that anything past goes. We still hold our lines and our boundaries. But we want to do that in ways that we use I statements, right? We don't want to go you. That's accusatory. That increases defense mechanisms in all of us, right? If I say, I feel blank, that's going to be received much differently than, well, you, or when you did X, Y, and Z. So we want to communicate from an I statement place. We also want to use and instead of but. This is something that most of us do in our day-to-day communication and we don't even realize we're doing it. We'll make a statement like, I hear that you're wanting to speak with a supervisor, but that's not possible. Well, we've just negated that first part of the statement, right? We've kind of negated that we're listening to that person or that we hear that person. We want to use and, right? Making both things feel true. I hear that you want to speak to a supervisor and I know that they are not currently in the building. What can we do to resolve this until you can speak with that individual? Right? Trying to say, okay, I hear you. We're not going to do a but, because then the person, they're probably already waiting for the but. We want to switch that to and. And I use this within a work context, but I know I catch myself utilizing this at home as well with my husband, right? Yeah, I said that, but da, 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 da. I've just kind of negated anything that I've just said, right? Or I know we agreed on this, but, well, essentially now I'm saying we no longer agree. So we want to switch and we want to be cautious of how and when we're using but and where can we replace it with and or make separate statements, kind of break them apart. And then lastly, there are times where it's appropriate to disengage. This is where maybe it's bringing in a teammate. This might be where we have to respectfully end the conversation of saying, I really want to help you. However, I cannot continue the conversation if it's feeling unsafe and it's feeling a bit unsafe, or I can't continue the conversation when you yell. I need the volume to come down so we can continue the conversation, right? Trying to frame it from I want to work with you, but here are my boundaries in order to continue to do that. And if the boundaries continue to push up against, again, know your policies and procedure for when it's appropriate to cut that interaction. Sometimes, though, it's really hard to know when that line is, and we can get hooked in with the individual. Getting hooked can kind of look like when someone says or does something that maybe makes us feel put down, maybe it hurts our feelings, maybe it frustrates us, maybe it questions our competence, and our defenses go up. And we are now hooked into this escalation with this person. We might see when we get defensive, we kind of get into this power struggle that maybe doesn't have to be there with this individual, right? Why am I continuing to go back and forth? Are we really making any progress? Am I just trying to get this person to see that I know what I'm talking about? Well, why do I need that validation from that person? I know what I'm saying is true. And the reality is they might never come around to that, right? So we got to know when to disengage. We got to be cautious of kind of a counter attack where our defensive behaviors then lead us to kind of go to a tit for tat mindset with the individual. We might try to, or we might withdraw. Maybe we shut down some of that respectful communication or some of that attitude of cooperation out of our defenses are up. And sometimes that feels like now we're punishing that person, right? My attitude is now shifted towards you, and I'm going to make it known. Well, that's not really going to help resolve this situation or de-escalate. So sometimes it's better to disengage before we get to that point. We want to be cautious of anger invitations. That might be when it feels very personal. Sometimes we might hear there's baiting statements, right? Like somebody said that knowing that it would frustrate me. This person knows that would cut deep. Or this person knows that would elicit a reaction. We don't have to give that permission to dictate what we do next, right? We can recognize, I'm not going to give in to that statement. I'm not going to respond. It might be best to just disengage. And then lastly, we want to be cautious of engaging with irrational statements. Again, we have to recognize we're not communicating with somebody who's operating from a logic-based standpoint. We aren't going to course correct the irrational statements in that moment, right? We have to tend to the feeling and come down from the frustration before we can have a conversation about some of those statements. And getting that person to maybe move off of that irrational thought or statement. So some techniques to keep in mind. We want to start from a place of agreement. So if I'm utilizing that communication with respect, I'm actively listening, I want to show cooperation. This might look like, where do we find common ground? What can we agree on? That might be, we both want this resolved. We might have different ideas about what that looks like or what's possible, but our goal is the same: resolution. Probably resolution with the least amount of consequences as well. So coming up with, what's our common goal? How are we going to work together? The other piece might be a broken record technique. We would just keep repeating the statement, and that can help us kind of ward off against those invitations for anger or those irrational statements, right? It's a lot harder to be baited into an argument or a challenge if I know this is my statement, this is what I can do, this is what I'm going to continue to go back to. I'm not going to move from that, right? Much harder to get pulled into a conflict that way. We're going to talk about some of our body language and positioning as well. How do we keep that as neutral and calm as possible? And then something to keep in mind is our mirror neurons, which I think is super cool because I think our brain is pretty amazing. And as humans, our wiring is pretty incredible. So we have neurons in our brain called the mirror neurons. That is what helps us with empathy. Our mirror neurons are in us so we are able to connect with other humans, right? Because we are wired for connection. We need a community. Our mirror neurons also are what makes us able to kind of match another person's energy or kind of stance. Now, with that, I will say, because our brain is wired towards the negative for survival, it's also easier for our mirror neurons to reflect negative behaviors or negative emotions and catch the negative emotions. It's called emotional contagion. Just kind of like a sneeze or a cough can feel contagious. Emotions operate that way because of our mirror neurons. But with that, if we're able to keep ourselves in check, maintain a body language and a posture of calm, that person, it's a lot harder for us to both go up. And there's a chance that that person starts to reflect some of your behaviors and your demeanor back to you, right? To say, I really want to hear you out. I need us to speak at a lower volume. And if I name that, if I start to really model that, the chances are they're going to start to reflect that back. So keeping that in mind, sometimes our own humanness helps us de-escalate one another, right? Or we might say, I really want to hear you. Could we go and take a seat somewhere a little bit more quiet? Can we sit down and talk about this? Right, just the natural repositioning and modeling what that new position can look like and working together what that might look like. The person may follow suit. Yes, absolutely. Being the change you want to see. Yeah, absolutely. It's really hard for us to ask somebody else to remain calm if we're not remaining calm, right? If we're escalating with that individual, chances are it's going to continue to escalate. So I'm just going to touch on these very briefly because these are things that are commonly hit on. Also, if anybody was with me last year, we touched on these briefly. So kind of cornerstones of active listening, we want to clarify, reflect back. That might be in a statement or kind of paraphrase what we're hearing. We want to ask open-ended questions and kind of minimal encouragers. Like if we start to say, okay, or yeah, the person can start to read that as sarcastic. So we want to be cautious of using too many of those. So kind of nodding our head occasionally, or when there's a break, we might say, yep, I'm following what you're saying. Or they might say, I don't even know if this is making sense, or I don't even know if you're hearing me. That might be an invitation to use an encourager. But we want to be cautious of using too many or while the person is speaking, because that might be an indicator that we're not actually actively listening. So some examples of these things. We might say, if I'm hearing you correctly, and we make the statement back. We might say, so as you see it, or so you understand it, this was the chain of events. It might say, I wonder if you're saying, this might be where we invite a feeling. So I wonder if you're saying you felt unheard when you were trying to speak with that person. Or I wonder if you're saying you have a concern about X, Y, and Z. Right, trying to give some other language to help move the individual along because sometimes they might be escalated to a point where, again, logic isn't fully present and we're having a hard time understanding the need. So the I wonder statement can be a really good way to try to fish for what is that need or that ask actually. It also demonstrates to that person you want to find the resolution with them. It might look like, as I'm listening to you, it seems as if, again, this could also be a really good entryway into a feeling statement. It seems as if you felt unheard. It seems as if you're frustrated by. Right. Try to help them name that feeling. If we have a situational difficulty, that might be a space where that person's aware of their interaction and they make some changes. If we're working with somebody with maybe some chronic difficulty, that could be an opportunity to build some of that rapport and helping them name what's happening and how to work through it. Again, that takes time, but some practice pieces there that can go a long way. So going back to, we want to start with that space of agreement. Some of those statements might say, so you're saying X, Y, and Z. Get them to say yes. Sometimes I will preface these, sometimes I'll do this in session if maybe somebody is frustrated with a circumstance. I might say, please correct me if this isn't accurate, but what I'm hearing you say is, or what I believe you're looking for is, right? Invite them to say, hey, it's okay if this isn't right. And I want to hear you out if it's not, right? I'm going to work with you until we're on the same page. It's okay to tell me no and rephrase. As long as the conversation stays respectful and safe, I'll work with you until I understand the situation better. Right. Again, we can still assert those boundaries of it's got to stay respectful and safe, but letting them know, hey, I really do want to work with you and understand. We want to avoid tacos, which is kind of a silly word to bring in here, but very true. We want to avoid anything that can be perceived as threatening. We want to avoid arguing or challenging. Again, we're operationalizing out of logic. So a challenge or an argument really isn't going to get us anywhere other than escalating the situation further. We want to be really cautious that we're not using any shaming language, or that the person doesn't feel judged by what's happening. Maybe we try to reframe some of what's happening a little bit and just say, man, that must be really tough. I can see why you're frustrated, right? Statements of empathy. Or yeah, I might be frustrated too if I was in that position, right? Try to make it a little bit personal. Humanize yourself a little bit in that moment, right? Yeah, I get frustrated too. I can see where you're coming from. Let's talk about what we might be able to do about that together, right? We're a team. We're going to work through it together. And if we're making statements about working through it together, or I can see where you're coming from, it's way less likely that that individual is going to feel judged or shame in that moment. And typically, if somebody's already escalated and shame or judgment comes in, they're not in a place to identify that's the feeling that comes up, and it's anger that comes out, right? It really fuels the anger even more. So those statements of empathy and understanding and collaboration can go a really long way. But a big part of that is our tone, right? We can say the same thing 10 different ways, and it can be perceived many different ways. So it's one of the things that makes text and email so difficult, right? We can only assign our own meaning in those situations as the recipient. But in person, right, I might say, oh, you made it on time. I almost sound surprised. I might say, oh, you made it on time. I might say, oh, you made it on time. Right? Depending on where we place the emphasis, you made it on time. So we've got to be really cautious about, it's not just what we say, it's how we say it, right? If you've ever had a teenager, you've probably said that a million times, right? It's not what you said, it's how you said it. We're trying to teach that our tone matters, our tone communicates something, there's a tone of respect that should be utilized in those situations. So think about kind of how your own maybe baseline of communication might come across sometimes, or what that looks like. Most of us have, like a phone voice that we utilize. In person, we might be a little less to tap into that. Maybe we have to be more aware of it in person. So last thing we're going to kind of hit on here is our nonverbal communication. So really only 7% of our communication is verbal. So we want to be really mindful of that, and really remember that our intention doesn't necessarily matter if we have upset an individual or if we have caused them harm, right? Intention doesn't really matter. in those moments. Perception is important. And that goes back to what Megan had stated earlier, everybody responds differently, right? So we have to know who we're talking to. If we have a frequent flyer that we have some rapport with, we might be able to get away with something a little bit more direct than somebody we don't have that rapport with. Know your relationships and what's appropriate for what individual. So we really want to be mindful of our gestures, because our body language, again, very much like tone, we can do the same thing, but it might come across differently. There can also be cultural differences that come into play with our body language. Shrugging, that can be kind of seen as, I don't care, or I don't know. We're not as engaged. If our jaws clenched or maybe our fists are clenched, that might be seen as threatening, maybe a bit closed off. Finger pointing can be seen as kind of an aggressive or a little patronizing, like we're getting our finger waved at us from an elder, even if we're not, right? That's kind of how it can feel. A fake smile, if we're really kind of trying to lay it on thick, and the person kind of sees through that, that also can feel very patronizing, or like you're not actually listening or taking me seriously. So we want to be cautious about how we're using our body language. We want to remain more calm and open. So you want to make sure that we aren't turned to the person at all, that we're completely facing towards them, that our hands aren't clenched, more open. Don't necessarily have to smile, right? If somebody's upset in front of us, a smile is probably not the most appropriate response. Again, mirror neurons, right? Where it's appropriate, reflect back to them their body language, not in an aggressive way, but if they're more flat and, maybe a little more fixed in their facial expression because they're frustrated, a smile probably isn't the appropriate reflection back, but a more neutral facial expression. We want to make sure we're at the same eye level, for eye contact, not one sitting or one standing. Where it's appropriate, is it appropriate to invite the person to sit? If we're in a situation that is safe, remove physical barriers, right? Don't have a computer and a desk completely blocking your interaction from this person. Kind of open up to them to say, hey, I'm here, I'm fully present. I'm not looking at you from above a screen and you're questioning if I'm really listening. So be mindful of that physical space. Also, if an individual has become frustrated and escalated, space is a really impactful tool that we can use, both in terms of maybe using some silence or some pausing to let them reflect, but also physical space. If someone's escalated, the last thing you want to do is make them feel cornered or like there's a bunch of physical barriers. We want to open up the space where we can to make it feel physically safe to them as well. So lots of different pieces there and things to consider. Before we kind of touch base here briefly on how to take care of ourselves, I want to throw it out to the group. What are some things that you all have found beneficial, either kind of one-liners to say to patrons who are upset to de-escalate, or maybe some one-liners to yourself to remain calm in some of those situations? What are tactics that you find beneficial to either calm the other individual or calm yourself in those situations? You all are great resources to each other, so I want to leave time for you all to speak to this as well. See someone in the chat. How would I feel? Yeah, absolutely. That's a great statement out of empathy, right? If I was in the situation, how would I feel? Or if I was in a different situation and feeling upset, how might I want the other person to respond? I'm sorry goes a long way. Absolutely. An apology has so much power. I'm sorry that happened. Using the word unfortunately, yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately, aren't available. Unfortunately, we aren't allowed to. Yeah, kind of showing I would if I could. That's just not quite possible. Assuring that we'll reach a resolution, however long it takes. Yeah, absolutely. Hey, I'm in it with you. We're going to figure this out. I'm not trying to rush you off. I'm going to give dedicated time. Those are great things. Absolutely. All right, we're going to transition here briefly into, so now what are some things that we can do to tend to ourselves in these circumstances, or what are some things that we can keep in mind to feel secure and safe? One thing that I really enjoy hitting on this because I think, not just I think, research shows there is so much power in our thinking. The thoughts and perceptions that we bring into situations directly impact how we feel and how we respond. And so if I enter a situation and I'm already thinking, here we go, we got this person acting out again, that's the attitude of which I'm bringing to that situation. And is that one that really works towards those goals of maintaining safety, de-escalation, and maintaining a positive customer relationship? Probably not, right? So I have to make sure personally that my thoughts and my perceptions are in check. That I'm not labeling this person is out of control. Maybe they're lacking the skills. Maybe they have a certain worldview or are emotionally dysregulated because of, we don't know why, right? We never know what somebody's fully experiencing or what they have experienced. So we want to be open to, and this does not excuse behavior. It just gives us some tools to say, okay, by labeling somebody as acting out or having anger management problems or uncontrollable or they're slow, is that really benefiting myself and the situation or this individual? Probably not. What probably benefits is to remain a little bit more open to, this individual might not have the skills or is seeming dysregulated, and that must be really scary, especially in public. So I'm going to try to meet them where they're at. As long as we're maintaining safety, I'm going to try to meet them where they're at and get them what they need. Now, that's not to say that it doesn't bring up our own feelings and our own reactions. And really, our emotional reaction tends to be what comes first, and then we might have a reasonable reaction that comes with some reflection or with taking a pause. So our emotional reaction, sometimes it takes that responsibility. That's part of, forgive me, I don't remember who threw that in the chat, but that taking it personally, right? We take responsibility for how somebody else is responding or behaving. And that typically brings a lot of feelings of guilt and hurt feelings and anger out in us. The reasonable reaction, that's where that moves into, we have those boundaries of, I've done all that I can do to benefit this situation and this individual. And I'm going to detach, I'm going to put in some distance here that, I did the best I could, but I can't control their response or their reaction. That's not a reflection of me. We want to put in some boundaries and some limits there. But we're a whole person, so we have these thoughts going on or these conflicting feelings all the time. And so there's this technique called the 3 minds. And I really like this because sometimes we think our emotional reaction or our reasonable reaction have to outwin each other, or one has to overtake. But this approach kind of says, well, where can both be true? Where can we bring consensus? Instead of one overtaking the other, where's the consensus? And that's our wise mind. So what's my emotional mind saying? Maybe I'm feeling frustrated in this circumstance. And I know I'm doing the best I can to find a resolution. Or I'm feeling incompetent and I know that's not true. This person maybe is just pushing my boundaries. I'm going to find a solution, right? Trying to hold space where both can be true, and our reasonable mind might bring things like our past experiences or our logic in, and kind of honoring that both have a space. That wise mind of I feel this and I know this. And one doesn't have to overtake the other, but both can be true. This might even be something that you kind of think on and reflect on, and maybe it becomes some kind of mantra for you, something that you can go back to when you're feeling frustrated or when a situation is escalating. So just something to keep in mind, or hopefully a tool that feels practical where you can kind of check in with yourself of how am I feeling and what do I know to be true? How do I hold space for both? And lastly, I just want to touch very briefly on some self-care pieces, because when these situations occur, it brings up our own past experience. It brings up maybe it hits on some of our own nerves within us. That's normal. You're human. Again, you're going to have a human response to some of these sets of circumstances. So how can you tend to yourself afterwards? Emotional types of self-care might look like journaling, talking with a therapist, an affirmation, a practice of gratitude, taking care of our physical self, getting in some movement, 20 minutes a day. 20 minutes a day make a difference on our mood. And so it doesn't have to be an hour-long intense workout in the gym. It could be a brisk 20-minute walk. That helps release some of those endorphins and releases some of that stress. But it can also be things like taking a nap, right? Taking care of our physical self. If we're really tired, we need to catch up. Give yourself permission to take that nap or take a bath and kind of check in with your physical body. Am I holding tension somewhere that I need to release? Are my shoulders up to my ears and I got to let it go? Do I need to shake out physically, step away from the computer screen for a few moments? Kind of checking in mentally. Maybe that's a new hobby or reading. Our social being. Am I talking with people that are uplifting and positive and helpful to me in my day-to-day? Any spiritual practices that are meaningful to you. For some, that might be a faith-based community. For some, that might be getting out into nature and feeling connected with nature and those things around us. DJ and I were talking about plants at the start today, and I said, unfortunately, I have no green thumb, and he was very kind and helped me reframe that. He said, you just have to find the plant that works for you, which I thought, that's not too bad. So maybe our types of self-care are like that as well. Sometimes we just don't feel like we have the time or the bandwidth. Find the type that works for you. Or maybe we've had a really grueling physical, mental day. Maybe our physical and mental being needs a break, and we need to exercise our social being and our social muscle. Kind of utilize these of what do I need based on how I'm doing today? And recognizing where there's probably things you're already doing within your day-to-day that can be self-care. We might just not be recognizing them as that. Or maybe we're doing them in the hustle and bustle of our day-to-day life and we're not thinking about it. Professional things like keeping our inboxes manageable, keeping our workspace clean. That's a way to take care of yourself in the professional setting. So recognize and give yourself credit for the things that you're already doing or utilizing times in your margin, like your commute for music or a podcast, or maybe your one chance at some silence for the day. And see that as this is a way that I'm going to care for myself today. So I encourage you all to kind of think on what might that look for you and how might that change depending on your day. And know if you ever need anything, when you need something, I'm biased. I recognize that life happens. Know that your employee assistance program is here. You have access to counseling resources as well as many other services. I always encourage people, put the phone number in your phone. Make it as easy for yourself as possible to, very similar to your professional policies and procedures. Know what you have before you need it, right? Just to make it as easy for yourself and your loved ones as possible. Uh, I know I kind of took us right up into time today, but I'm happy to stay on if there are any questions or anything anyone wants to talk about.
Feel free. First, thank you, Ellen. You've done a great job. This was fantastic. But feel free if you have questions, you can unmute, ask them right out, or you can drop them in the chat. I can see the chat is starting to uh, uh, start to bubble a little bit. Teacher
Yeah,
dropped
yep.
something, a nice little nugget. Remember that it's not personal. Set a boundary. If you genuinely tried to help this person, you tried your best.
Yeah,
Um, and
absolutely.
and then the question, is this the EAP for all library staff? Each library gets the choice to opt into the EAP. So they can participate with that. So just check with your library. We know which ones are participating. The recording will also be available on our YouTube page.
Any other questions, concerns? Thank you all for joining today. You've been great. I've appreciated the chat going off and unmuting and discussing. Like I said, that's my preferred mode. So really appreciate you all and your time. If there are questions that come up, DJ has my contact information. So DJ, feel free to shoot any of those on over to me directly.
Will do. Well, thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day. And again, if you want to check out this recording, it'll be available on our YouTube page. But thank you again to Ellen, and to AllOne Health. All right, take care, everyone.
Thank you all.